Hi, everybody. Joe Chaffee, Sunday, September 23rd, 2018. Hope everybody had a great weekend. We've got a lot of things to talk about tonight. So we're going to start off, first off, what a gloomy day it was in my neck of the woods. And you can see that narrow band of rain on the regional radar that I put up to the right is shrinking and slowly trying to push its way southward. I don't know how much success it's going to have. And in those areas in South Jersey, at least, and in parts of southeastern Pennsylvania and back through Maryland and northern Virginia and into eastern West Virginia, it's pretty much rained all day. And where hasn't been raining, it's been pretty cloudy on either side. We, of course, have a lot of stuff to talk about tonight. The tropics, we're going to talk about that. The long range, how it all plays into all this. Uh, Plus, a couple of funny things that I noticed today on the late afternoon run, which we'll get to when we talk about the long range. I want to start off first with the what's going on in the east, and actually, it's more than just the east. You can see the boundary here that goes back to Texas and on up through Oklahoma. Okie AG, one of our regulars, who's on to one of our semi-regulars, who's on tonight. Always good, great to see. Talking about the rain that occurred in Oklahoma, and of course, that's all flooding rains that happened. And that, by the way, the remnants of a Pacific tropical depression that, if you remember, late last week, formed in the Gulf of California and then got sent up to the north and east. So we've got this long boundary that runs from Texas all the way northeast through the mid-Atlantic states. Where else? Because that's where it has been for months. And the clouds and the rain that is with it. Also, we can at least look at the system that is off the east coast, well east of Florida, and moving westward. This is a very broad low pressure center that's been out there for days. It still remains a very broad low pressure center with some patchy thunderstorm activity to the east and north and a little bit to the south, but very little going on near the center. We have not seen pressures fall here. It's just a very weak low level circulation that's just edging westward. The upper level conditions are not favorable for this to develop, so it hasn't. It might get a little more conducive when it gets to the coast, but let me just say a couple of things regarding that. First off, it is highly unlikely that this would develop. If let's just say, just for laughs, let's say that this system does wind up developing a bit when it gets to the coast. It would mean that probably you would see the convection form near the center, and it would just kind of tighten up a bit. So it doesn't necessarily mean that this would have any impact in the Carolinas. Also, the frontal boundary to the north and west of that, as that swings to the east coast, this is not going to be something that winds up going in there and stalling out. This is all going to eventually wind up getting absorbed in this whole system, at least from what I see. So I'm not really overly concerned with this at this point. We'll just keep watching it. The Hurricane Center had it a 40% chance of it developing. Now they had cut it back to 30% earlier today on their tropical weather outlook. The new one is just out, so I can at least give you a look on that and see what they've done with it. And okay, now they have 30% in the next 48 hours and 40% through the next 5 days, which is higher than what it was, but it's not especially high. And that, again, I want to read the specifics of what they said here. Environmental conditions are forecast to become a little more conducive for development during the next couple of days. The one thing that also to me argues against it, I would have liked to have seen at least one of the global models do something with it, either the GFS or the European. The European maintains an identity with this for a while, but the GFS really doesn't do too much with it. So again, my confidence level isn't especially high with respect to all of this. Notice a few more folks jumping on this evening. All the football games are done, so it's good to see a decent Sunday night crowd. So we'll watch it and see what happens. The rain that is going to come up from the mid-Atlantic states northward is going to be with this frontal boundary shifting northward as a warm front. And we're going to examine what happens with that, of course, and how that is all going to play out. So let's get some maps up here, some other maps, and let me get the board set up. And I guess we can probably start. Why don't we just get the tropics out of the way, since everybody's going to want to know about that. So I thought we'd take a look. Well, first we'll look at Tropical Storm Kirk, which here are the model track guidance that the Hurricane Center looks at. You'll notice that, and I want you to remember what I'm going to say here. You'll notice that they're all fairly clustered together. There are a few outliers that have a bit more of a northerly course late in the period. The vast majority of them take this through the islands and into the eastern Caribbean. We still have an issue regarding the upper level winds as not being conducive for development. That really hasn't changed very much in what we saw this afternoon. The Hurricane Center edges the intensity up a bit over the next couple of days. But once it gets closer to 45 or 50 west, it's going to be underneath the trough that right now is handling Subtropical Storm Leslie up to the north. And that is going to mean it will run into the same upper air winds that we saw Tropical Depression 11 yesterday east of the Windward Islands get involved with, and it wound up falling apart. So it's kind of dicey as to what's going to happen to this once it gets far enough west. It should strengthen. It's got a fairly favorable environment right now, low wind shear, and the water temperatures are certainly warm enough to support this to strengthen a bit. But if it hasn't done it so far, so we'll watch to see. In fact, the convection's gotten a little bit disorganized during this afternoon. And here's the GFS, the ensembles. Again, you've got some members turning it northward, and some they kind of split here. Some go north, most go west or west northwest into the eastern Caribbean. Also, I did notice that the afternoon GFS did hold on to this system, showing it as an entity longer than it has in prior runs. So maybe it's telling us something. It doesn't really do much with it, but at least it does have a surface low that it indicates crossing into the islands and into the eastern Caribbean. Eventually, it does get rid of it, but it wasn't even doing that a day or two ago. Now I want to show you the track. Remember what I had just said about them being tightly clustered together? Now I'm going to show you the hurricane track models from Subtropical Storm Leslie. So clearly, well, a couple of things. It's hard to, the starting point is actually, if you go center left, you see where it says 34 north? Let me see if you can make sure you can see the numbers I'm referring to. They're a little bit on the small side. But on the center left, we're right about halfway through the screen. If you go up, if you go 2 boxes to the east, that's where you have the beginning of where it is at the moment. And then follow these tracks along. Okay, so clearly the confidence level on this is extremely low because they are literally all over the place. And it's hard to even follow. I mean, some of the tracks here are somewhat bizarre, going east and then south, then west, and then after that, some turn it south again. I mean, I don't know. I don't even know how it gets that one that goes all the way up and then comes all the way down so that it's northwest of the original starting position out in the long range. So needless to say that this is going to be one that is going to be kind of fun to watch, even though it doesn't look like it's going to impact any land areas. So we can have a little bit of fun watching this just go crazy in the central Atlantic. And there's other upper air things that are going on with this that are going to impact it and change it in a number of ways. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this. And also, if you look at the GFS ensembles, again, the members are everywhere. So can you imagine you're trying to make a forecast out of this when you're handed all this information. The only thing you could really do is just kind of take the average tracks, which is what the dark line suggests, and that's probably, I didn't look closely enough to what the Hurricane Center did. They probably, just basically looked at it and said, you know what, we can't make heads or tails of this, so let's just follow consensus, and we'll leave it at that. I'm going to before we go to the map here, why don't I just bring up a satellite view? Thanks to tropicaltidbits.com, we can bring up a satellite view of the wide Atlantic, and we can see all these systems running around at the same time. I think this view will probably work best. So just give it a second to load all the frames, and I'll make it a little bigger on the screen here. So you can see the two systems that are turning that are of importance, of course. You have Kirk in the lower right there out in the Atlantic. Notice the enhanced convection, the enhanced cloud tops kind of fade out a little bit. There's an area west of what appears to be a center and just a little bit around the center, and that's about it. So it doesn't really look all that impressive this afternoon. Certainly, it's being kept at a minimal tropical storm, and I can't argue with that. And then you have Subtropical Storm Leslie. Notice it's got that comma shape, so it really does. It certainly does not look like a totally tropical storm. There's an upper low that's over it, and the cold upper low is impacting the structure, obviously. So until it separates from that upper low, it's going to remain subtropical, and it may do that. It may eventually separate and become a tropical system. But these things take time when they start off like this. By the way, this is the 6th storm this year that we've seen as subtropical at some point in its life cycle. Going back to 1968, I believe 69, there were 5. And that was the record up until now. So now we have 6. But remember, it only goes back to 1968. And I can tell you from my experience over the years, when you go back 20, 30 years or more, there are a lot of storms that should have been classified as subtropical storms or tropical storms and warrant. And then over the years, the Hurricane Center has been going back in their research, and some of these storms have eventually, that were originally considered non-tropical, have been reclassified as subtropical or even tropical storms. You go back in the record books, you'll find a number of them listed as unnamed tropical storm. They somehow, for one reason or another, they weren't considered to be tropical. Perhaps it was a lack of data. Perhaps it was the location of where the storm was, that they couldn't really get the information that was needed to decide whether the system was truly tropical or not. But it's hard to imagine these days that something like that could happen. It used to happen. You go back to the 80s, and particularly in the 70s and 60s, it happened at least once a season. There was one system or two systems that fell under the radar, and a couple of times it would be an instance where something wasn't tropical, but it developed so quickly that and it was perhaps close to land, that it was just too late to get to make all the changes that you needed to make. So the satellite kind of tells it all. By the way, if you look at Leslie, look at the clouds south of Leslie. They are all going southwest to northeast. That is the shear zone that ripped the Tropical Depression 11 apart, and that is the shear zone that Kirk is going to eventually move into as it moves westward. So it's got big hurdles ahead of it as far as being able to survive. And you'll notice, by the way, the system off the southeast coast of the U.S. really remains rather undeveloped. You get these flare-ups of higher cloud tops and thunderstorms, and they sort of come and go. It doesn't look like a tropical system here, just a broad center of low pressure. And again, as I said, I did not notice any of the models doing much with this. The Europeanists kept an identity, but that was just about it. So on to the late afternoon GFS, and you can see the three systems on the map. Make it a little bigger here for you. Maps courtesy of tropicaltidbits.com. There is Kirk I want you to be able to at least see the time and date. So I got to shrink it down just a bit, and this way we can see everything. So you can see Kirk down in the lower left, Leslie in the center, a closed isobar east of the Florida coast, which represents the low that is there. And as we move it closer to the coast and through time, Leslie drops southward and then turns southeastward. Kirk moves along, and by Tuesday afternoon, you have a little the closed center from the low in the off the southeast coast gets closer to the South Carolina coast, and at least on the GFS, it is pretty much absorbed with this into this frontal system that is moving northward. So it really doesn't have any impact. And by the way, were it to develop, honestly, I don't see how this could develop into much. Let's say a cluster of thunderstorms does form near the center, and if it were to become a tropical depression or a weak tropical storm, I think it would not have a whole lot of impact here because of what's going on. It would it would turn northward and then northeastward and then goodbye, as the frontal system in the east kind of just takes it over. Meanwhile, if we watch what happens with Leslie, there's actually another low that forms north of it. So you can, it almost seems as if Leslie gets absorbed by that low, which then moves southward. So I don't know if this is right. I'm not sure how I'm weighing this. The Hurricane Center is actually mentioning the fact that they expect Leslie to be absorbed by this developing low to its north. But then what happens is if it gets absorbed and then that low drops southward and becomes tropical, which if you look at it, that's what it sort of looks like here on the GFS. Then does it get a new name or does it Leslie continue? I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is, and I think the Hurricane Center will probably figure something out if this is what comes to pass. But Kirk, in the meantime, pressure drops to about 1,002, and so it maintains tropical storm intensity, if barely, as it crosses to the islands, and then after that, it's gone. You can barely find it here by the time we get to the 5th and 6th day in a long range at the end of next week. Again, it's going to have to deal with this huge zone of shear. So I don't think that either of these systems are going to have, based on what I'm looking at now, it's hard for me to envision that either of these systems are going to have major impacts on the weather across the U.S. Now, I'm going to jump to the upper air because it was just kind of interesting this afternoon. It's amazing how these model runs can oftentimes just switch to 180-degree opposites once you get into the long range. And I understand why it does that. It is because as you go out further in time, there's more variability. So there's more room for things to change in the upper atmosphere. So that's going to basically impact things down the road. If you change the strength of one thing, you're likely to change the strength of 3 or 4 other things. By the way, we also have this super typhoon in play in the West Pacific, and I haven't looked at it closely. We can kind of look at it together in a little while. But I did see a few tweets. Ryan Mao, who's on Twitter, and has a weather map website called weather.us, which is pretty cool, by the way. He tweeted the fact that that typhoon is going to impact the longer term pattern in bringing, maybe bringing significant rains to Northern California. That was his tweet. I don't know. Again, I haven't really looked at what's happening, but sometimes you get these typhoons that recurve in the West Pacific, and they wind up energizing systems that are up in the Gulf of Alaska, which in turn create deep troughs in the eastern part of the United States, depending on what else is out there. But it was interesting to see that tweet regarding that. So when we look at the upper air, everything according to plan, as we've noted, you still have this stubborn ridge, this stubborn flat ridge along and off the East Coast that kind of sits there. And as we go through this week, you get a fairly deep trough that drops down into the middle of the country. Looks like the trough axis is at about 95 or so west, or just a bit left of that. And you have a ridge off the west coast, you have a ridge off the east coast. That wrapped up low out in the Atlantic Ocean is Leslie slash new North Atlantic low that absorbs it, and whatever happens from there, we'll see. But that trough swings around. We finally get this frontal system out of the east late this week. Big ridge over Alaska and a split flow. Okay, so what I mean by a split flow, we'll put it up on the paint board. I know for some of you, I did this yesterday, but in case you weren't here yesterday, we can show it to you this time around. So let me just bring the paint board up. And okay, so now you guys can see what I see, and you can see it there. All right, so this is the upper air. We're talking a week from now. Okay, 8 o'clock Sunday night next week. So when we're doing this next Sunday, this is what the upper air is supposed to look like. So what have we got in all of this? Well, we do have a bit of a split flow. And what I mean by a split flow is exactly that. The flow in the jet stream is basically split into two main pushes. We've got this push up here from Canada going southward to about the U.S. border and then turning straight east. And then you have this in the Pacific, okay? And that is a second jet that is in play out in the Pacific. And that also is being helped along by a rather deep upper low that is along 140 degrees west. And that is off the coast of Washington and Oregon. So you're probably going to see some systems getting pushed along in that particular direction. Of course, while all this is going on in the upper atmosphere, you've got this upper high that runs down into southern Virginia. And of course, you have the system out in the Atlantic. This will be, you know, whichever it is, be it Leslie or whatever the M name is. But the point when you look at all this upper air like this is that you're going to have, you've got warmer air in the southeastern part of the United States. You've got cooler air from Canada trying to push southward. That boundary zone is probably right along the lines of where it has been for the last several months across the mid-Atlantic states, and that produces issues regarding rain that could occur along that frontal the boundary zone. And that's one thing that's been constant here in the last couple of months, is that we keep getting these fronts here in the eastern part of the United States that settle down and stall, and that pattern seems to want to continue for a while, at least going into the next week or so. But there are some changes that are showing up on the long range. Do we believe them? I don't know. But running forward, that ridge kind of starts to shift to the west, going out at about day 9. Now, please remember, this is just the GFS, the way the GFS sees it tonight. It could very well be different tomorrow. But I got a really good laugh out of this as we look through the long range, and we're at day 11. I honestly wish, and I know it's not going to happen, because I honestly would wish that this does play out like this, if only to see what the outcome would be from a practical basis, because that is, for the East anyway, for October 9th, is pretty cold, okay? If this ever came to be. And I don't, you know, the odds of this coming to be on a map 16 days from now are so insanely low. You also have, by the way, a very deep trough just inland of the west coast with this, so it would be cold on both coasts. And where you have the ridge is up through the plains, so it'll be there'll be a narrow area where temperatures will be on the warm side of average, but not by a whole lot. And either side of that, you're talking about colder than average temperatures in the west, much colder than average temperatures in the east, and all sorts of odd things happening weather-wise. Again, I'm not a believer in it, but I just thought it was really funny to see this and thinking, okay, is this like late November? You know, now just to show you from the standpoint of reality why you can't believe it, you can't believe something this far out, is that I'm just going to go back one run. I'm going to run back just to make it as close as possible to a time match. But it's for the most part it's for the same time period. So here we have the new run, and I'll just go back. I'm going to go back one run. Look at the difference. I mean, it's insane. The last run earlier today has a big ridge in the east, and it has the trough in the west, but it has a totally different upper air look. Let's go back one more run before that. Again, totally different. Okay, one more, just to show you. One more. All right, it's kind of like the first one I showed you after the first map that I changed to, which was the one from this afternoon. So it sort of looks more like this. Okay, but again, we went from this to this. Okay, which is and that those are two totally different rounds of weather that you can anticipate out of this. So let's come to the surface. And we'll set the table. That's the surface map that went with that, by the way. I mean, that's just crazy. This is so incredible. Well, you know what? Just again, also just for laughs, we can look at the 2-meter temperatures. Again, would that this could be true? Okay, so this is one. All right, so this is October 9th, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 40s. Okay, 40s for temperatures, and this is at 6Z is at 2 a.m. So you've got 30s and 20s. We don't have the one in between, but 40s for daytime highs. And even out in the west, I mean, it's just cold in the west where you've got 40s and 50s all over the place during the latter part. It would be 11 o'clock in the morning there, but you know, a large part of the country is chilly if this were the case, except for Florida where it's in the 90, it's 90, and in South Texas and along the Gulf Coast where it's into the 80s. So it's marvelous fiction, but again, I think it was worth looking at just for the standpoint of getting a good laugh out of it. And now we can come to this map. Let me just hang on. I want to just come to the chat board with you guys for a second, so I at least we can talk. You know, we'll talk a little bit, and then I'll come back to the board. Johnny Quest only getting to a high of 54 today. If you're on the north side of this frontal boundary today, temperatures in a lot of places did not get out of the 50s. MJM tree service and maintenance. Let me get that right again. MJM tree service and maintenance. It hasn't stopped raining all damn day in coastal Ocean County. The radar is trying to show it's sinking a little bit further south, but I don't know how much further south it's going to get. There's going to be rain in parts of South Jersey, MJM, for a good part of the night, but it did make for a very, very miserable Sunday. Housewife Until Heaven, thank you very much for your kind words. And let me say hi to David Uber. Always good to see you here. Also to David Fuller. Mike Akulian, thank you, sir. I see a lot of development in the Gulf of Mexico and a lot of stuff popping up off Africa. Still looks like October is going to be a challenge. Well, wouldn't shock me. By the way, since I just realized I got to take you off. I'm sorry, not you personally. I got to take this off the screen here for a second, and I'll bring me up full screen. And we're going to come back to the maps in a moment. So MJM, here's your radar. I think that was it. Hang on. Nope. There we go. There's your radar here tonight. And, you know, that rain looks like the northern border of it is just north of where you are. And South Jersey is still getting it. As of about 6 o'clock, by the way, there was about mostly between half an inch and an inch of rain. I'm sure the numbers have gone up a little bit since then. Some places in and around Southwest Jersey seem to get the most with regards to the rainfall. So I'm just going to leave that. Now, you know what? We're going to bring the U.S. radar up a little in a second. So let me put that on. By the way, as always, whenever you see radars here or satellites or when it comes to severe weather, obviously this is dated. When you're watching this on a replay, it's 8:30 Eastern time. So be sure to check your local radars from your local National Weather Service websites, which you can access by going to weather.gov. Sean Bear, good to see you here. Let's see. And it is, by the way, Michael, yes, will be a challenge going into October. I'm wondering whether there might be an early shutoff to the hurricane season this year. It's just a question I put out there, judging from what I've seen going on. I think it's a fair question. There's some linkage to suggest, you shut the hurricane, which would make sense. Hurricane seasons that shut off early could be a precursor to an early starting winter. So something to think about. Matthew Warman, is there any severe weather this week in the eastern U.S.? I think Wednesday there might be a shot with some severe weather in some places with that frontal boundary coming in. Wednesday will be the one very warm, humid day, and you've got the upper trough that's going to be swinging eastward toward the East Coast. I don't know if the Storm Prediction Center did anything. I'm going to put the pull their longer range forecast map up and see what they did. So for Wednesday, they have a general area. Now this is interesting. Let's go to day 4, and hopefully it holds, because this is something you don't see very often. So let's this I'm going to bring up. So let's bring this up. I know I tend to jump around sometimes, but often I don't. And I try to think about what I'm going to do, and then always something comes along that causes me to change course every once in a while. So excuse me, I do jump around on occasion. You don't see this too often, though. The Storm Prediction Center doesn't. When you see a 15% chance of severe weather on their day 4 forecast map, pay attention. Okay, so I'm going to be paying attention to this. With this front coming on Wednesday, this cold front that's going to be coming through, we're going to be in a pretty solid warm sector with a lot of tropical air. So it would not shock me at all to see some strong thunderstorms out of this. They have a 15% risk of severe weather, so they're indicating that this will be a large area of slight risk for severe thunderstorms. From West Virginia, southeastern Ohio, northeastern Kentucky, throughout all of Pennsylvania, most of New Jersey, Long Island, and for a good chunk of New England. So I'm going to be paying attention to that, because, as I said, the Storm Prediction Center, usually on day 4, the predictability level is too low, or if it's clear that there's not going to be any severe weather, they'll say probability too low. But when they put up a probability in their longer range forecast period, it's a pretty good indicator that something's on the table. Scott Burler, there are going to be more tropical waves coming off the African coast, but bear in mind, we're coming to the end of September. That season's going to shut down really soon. You get toward the end of September, beginning of October, the waves usually don't develop until they get west of 55 or 60 west. So I would be, I think the chances of something happening out of the Cape Verdes, where it forms, where Kirk is, the probabilities start to go way down. But that doesn't mean that those waves can't flare up when they go westward. Robin J. from Sarasota, Florida, appreciate it. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate you being here. Sybil's Practical Living and Prepping. Hello from South Texas. Hello back. I lived in South Texas. I worked in Corpus Christi back in 1982 and 1983 on KRIS TV. I don't know where in South Texas you are, but if you're in that area, I do remember it well. I lived right on the beach on North Padre Island for a couple of years. I did notice, William Huber, it's been cold in Canada virtually all month, and that has been one constant in the overall pattern. The other thing we're going to do, it's still a little bit early, but we get into the month of October, we're going to start looking at the snow cover buildup across North America and across Siberia, and they can give us some clues about the winter ahead. Donald Crum, upwelling from Leslie should show in water temperature anomalies in a couple of weeks. No question. I mean, it is going to be up. I think it's going to be out there for a while, even though it's pretty far out. You are going to see eventually you are going to get the surf churned up along the east coast from it, but it's going to be a while yet. But you know, in another week, yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised. I don't, you know, Matthew Warman, Kirk impacting the East Coast. It's hard for me to see that happening, given what's going on in the upper pattern. I don't want to say unequivocally no, but I think the bigger hurdle is not so. The bigger hurdle is going to be whether it's able to survive because of the strong wind shear that exists out at about 50 degrees west, and then if it survives that, it's going to run into some more wind shear when it gets in the Eastern Caribbean. So, you know, I'm thinking probably not, unless that shear relaxes. It's hard to see how it's going to get much past the islands. So for now, I would probably lean to strongly lean to a no to the answer to your question. Okie AG, you went from severe droughts to 3/4 of an inch on Friday. He's in Oklahoma, by the way, where they had rains from the remnant tropical depression from the Pacific and all the energy that's coming out of the southern plains with that frontal boundary. So 3/4 of an inch on Friday, 6.5 inches on Saturday, flash flood watches, 2.5 inches today. So you got all your water back. That's a good thing. Now you can start cutting grass again, which is always nice. Always nice. Ben McGinnis, what does potential tropical system coming up the East Coast do? That if we're talking about that low that is the low that is spinning off the southeast coast right now, I really think it doesn't do much of anything. There's some showers with that. It's going to wind up getting absorbed with the frontal boundary. Maybe it juices up the moisture a little bit, but not enough to really make a difference. If you didn't know it was there, you wouldn't know it otherwise. So I don't really see it being a big problem. Oh, thank you, Scott's Adventures, for your kind words. I really appreciate it. Matthew Warren, ask away when you got questions. Appreciate that you've got interest in meteorology. And you know what? I try to make it fun, which is good. You want to make it fun. Early winter seems likely, Dean Walker. Well, let's see. If the hurricane season shuts down early, like it did last year, maybe it is. Humid southwest flow for Joseph Mayano, who's getting ready to get married on Thursday. Dodge the showers for the rehearsal and dry on Thursday. You know what? Your rehearsal night, it can rain. But yeah, you want your day dry. And I think Thursday we're going to squeeze in a dry day this week in the east. And we'll show you that in a second. Hopefully the snow starts ready. Not going to ask when since we don't know. Matthew Warman, you talked to Paul Pioric yesterday. I've never met Paul. I do know of him and of his work. He's a good guy. So that's talk to him. I'm sure you can get some good info from him. He's a good guy. I went to City College of New York, CCNY. Which I graduated in 1982, so it was a long time ago, 35 years ago. How did you like the winter in the Northeast last year with all the nor'easters? It was a crazy year last year. It was like it was literally it was a winter of incredible extremes in the atmosphere, and I guess those extremes that we saw in the first half with the cold, the second half with the warmth, and then March comes along with 4 nor'easters in 2.5 weeks. I mean, that was just absolutely crazy. Will the teleconnections, asked Ryan Ford. It's funny you should ask that because I do have the teleconnections up on my screen tonight, and we are going to take a look at it. Okay, but just real quick, let me just do some shameless self-promoting. 2 things. I appreciate those of you who support my channel that have supported my channel by either hitting Super Chat, and tonight we have MJM Tree Service and Maintenance. Thank you so much for hitting Super Chat. And you can always message me directly there, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you. It gets me a couple of stogies. So those of you who have used Super Chat, thank you very much. Another way you can do it is you can do it by shopping on Amazon. I have a link to Amazon on the descriptor to this live stream and on the descriptor of this video if you're watching it on the replay. And you can, if you shop on Amazon, you can use the Joe Stradamus link that I'm going to put up here on the chat. So here's the link to that. If you shop on Amazon, you get your stuff, and Amazon throws me back a little bit of coin, and it's a great, easy way. Since if you're going to be shopping on Amazon anyway, it works out. Cash 82, thank you for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really appreciate it greatly. And the other one I'll wait for. We can talk about Patreon a bit later on. So let's bring the maps back. And Brian Ford, so you asked about the teleconnection, so I think we can go there. I'm, you know, the teleconnections, basically, you know, they measure pressure patterns in certain areas of the atmosphere, which are important to watch for with regards to the longer range. And where is it? Oh, hang on, folks. I gotta find it. There we go. So here we have the four indices that we look at when it comes to this. We look at the PNA, which is the Pacific North America Index. If you go on the esrl.noaa.gov website, it'll explain to you how they calculate these things. And it's basically a measure of pressure changes over different parts of the globe. The Pacific North America Index, for example, looks at pressure changes up in the Northeast Pacific, but it also combines pressure changes off the Southeast coast and in a few other spots. And when it's negative in the wintertime, it usually, but not always, means that there's more troughing in the west and more ridging in the east. But that doesn't always work, okay? Nothing here is a magic bullet, and I think that's one point I want to make very strongly. When we look at these sorts of things, you can't look at them as magic bullets. In other words, you can't say, for example, the North America, the NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, or what we refer to as the Greenland Block. There's this notion that you can't have snowstorms without a negative NAO. Well, guess what? A lot of the snowstorms we had last year, when I say snowstorms, I mean large areas getting a foot plus in the Northeast. You know, there was the idea that, well, you can't really have a snowstorm because the NAO is not negative. Well, guess what? That's wrong. We've had a number of snowstorms in the last 5 years with the NAO not being negative. So they're not magic bullets. The one thing that I like, the one index that I like that seems to work for me in terms of the mindset of my forecast, is I try to watch that East Pacific oscillation, which is the North Atlantic oscillation, except it's in the East Pacific. Okay, when that goes negative, and in this case, it's forecast to be strongly negative toward the very end of the month. That, you know, the EPO is usually a pretty good indicator. In the wintertime, when you have a strong negative EPO, it usually means cold weather in the eastern part of the United States. So by going this negative, it's at least trying to telegraph the idea of cold air coming into the United States. And we are going to see that later this week, at least across the plains and parts and into the western Great Lakes. Some of that cool air will eventually make it to the East Coast, but it won't be as extreme. The other thing to look at when you look at these indices is when you see these rapid ascents going from strongly negative to zero in a very, very short period of time, usually at the point that it approaches the neutral line. And if you think about it, yeah, you're getting a big pressure change. So the EPO index going up is forecasting pressure rising in the area that it covers. And that is probably going to mean that you know, there might be some storminess for developing somewhere. So that might be something to pay attention to. The NAO, oftentimes with the NAO, when you see it deeply negative and it runs up to zero, or if you see it strongly positive and it goes down to zero, again, that's telling you that there's a big pressure change going on there, and it's probably telegraphing something big developing someplace. We'll put big in quotation marks, but something big developing somewhere, because that is, you know, what does that mean? That we don't know. That's a short range question. But the EPO being strongly negative is very interesting to me, and that rapid ascent up going into the October 7th, 8th, 9th time frame. This is all based on model runs from last night. So we'll see where it takes us down the road. Since we're looking at this tonight, what I'll do is going forward, the next few nights, we'll take a look at how this changes from run to run and see where that, see what it means as the models change. And, we watch to see how these patterns evolve. Okay, so let's go back to our friendly neighborhood GFS as we are now back to the weather across the U.S. for the upcoming week and what we're going to see. Now, watch the system off the southeast coast, by the way, as all this stuff starts to move into the east from the frontal boundary shifting eastward. Big high, strong high going into the Maritimes. There's going to be a fairly decent pressure gradient later tomorrow night up my way, so it might get a bit breezy along the coast. But you can see that low off the coast there of Georgia, well off the coast, 1016 millibars. The pressures are not that low. And there isn't even a closed isobar here by the time we get to Tuesday morning. Looks like a fairly substantial shot of rain coming up Monday night, Tuesday morning through the Monday night and Tuesday through the northeast. It does shift away a bit for you, Johnny Quest, in Virginia and West Virginia. And then we have the frontal boundary. This is for Wednesday night. So the Storm Prediction Center is looking at this and saying this is severe weather possibilities. And I kind of agree with that. We've got very warm tropical air. The warm front that's coming up is going to move through Tuesday night. And we're probably going to see temperatures in the upper 70s and into the 80s on Wednesday, which for this time of year is pretty warm. And you've got this cold front coming with a decent push of cool air behind it. So I think there probably will be some strong thunderstorms running around. The front goes by. So Thursday looks dry for you, Joe, for your wedding. If enough of that high holds on, it'll keep the rain. The front's going to try to stall out again. The southern part of that front stalls out in Virginia and down through the Carolinas. So they do get some rain Thursday night into Friday, and another wave comes up. And then that moves out, and then finally some dry air for next weekend. And then after that, this is where you start to kind of shrug your shoulders and ask yourself, well, what's real and what's not? Because we're going to have to go, look at some other runs. But you eventually do get a cooler shot of air that goes out, another a weak front that comes by. And this is kind of funny because this is where going into later next weekend and early the following week was where the GFS had this big cold air mass into the east back about a week or so ago, and that's not going to happen now. We have yet another system heading for the Great Lakes and another cold front during the first couple of days of October, and then it gets kind of chilly behind that, and an even stronger front. And of course, now we're at day 11 and 12, so who knows if this is right. But as I showed you earlier, the model variations in the long range are just going to get larger and larger. Hey, why don't we look at that super typhoon? How we do that? And by the way, if you go to tropicaltidbits.com, you can get all this stuff. This is, one of the best websites around. So if you go to current storms, by the way, if you don't know this already, Levi Cowan, who runs this wonderful website, has all the storms around the world, every single one of them on this one page. So it makes for easy access. You can see the intensity models that are produced, and all sorts of other things, the ensembles for the GFS and the Canadian. I just wanted to see where he has. Okay, so this is Typhoon. This is at 28 west. All right, so this is Trami. Top winds are 120 knots. So let's open the satellite pic on its loop so we can take a look. So it's a category 4. It's got it looks like the ice filled a little bit. It may have been stronger back in the last 24 hours. I haven't been paying attention, but it still has that sort of buzzsaw look, although it has a slight raggedness to it. Every bit a powerful hurricane, obviously, but moving toward the west-northwest. And the reason, all right, where did it go? Okay, so let me just get rid of that. And when we look at the GFS ensembles with this, it turns it northeastward uh, over, it moves it right over most of the island of Japan. And look how tightly clustered it is. It makes this sharp right turn and goes over the entire all of Japan, getting hit by this by this hurricane, and then continues northeast from there. So the recurvature uh, probably impacts the models in that it energizes whatever's going to be going on out in the Pacific in the Gulf of Alaska, which if you keep pushing it downstream, you wind up with that trough in the east. In fact, we can actually take a look and see what the GFS did with that. So let me bring up the Pacific. I'll bring up the Pacific region. Let me see, where's the map? Okay, US, tropics, North Pacific. All right, so let's look at the North Pacific upper air because we're able to see all the way out. So Trami is going to be on the left here. Let's see how it impacts. All right, so on the lower left is the Typhoon. And let's see how it moves along. Moves up over all of Japan. So now it gets picked up by this strong upper air system that's over Northeast Asia, and then that eventually strengthens and moves into the Bering Sea. So this pops up a big ridge in Alaska, which drops a downstream trough off the Pacific coast, and at the same time strengthens the flow in Canada to bring cooler air into the eastern part of the United States. So you can see where the impact is through all of this. And as you move along, eventually you start to see that shifting into the Gulf of Alaska, and then you drop a deep trough along the west coast and along the east coast. Okay, again, it's in the long range. It's 2 weeks from now. We don't even know if this is going to be real, because I guarantee you on the very next run, it is going to look ever so different than what you saw there. But that's kind of how that's how the typhoons wind up impacting the weather pattern all the way down the line. I can think back to, I think it was I want to say 2014 into 2015. There was a January typhoon, I believe, that strengthened the upper low, that wound up strengthening the upper low in the Gulf of Alaska, which created a huge pattern change all the way along and brought in 8 weeks of brutal cold from mid-January to almost to late March, where I had lakes here frozen here till the end of March, which in all the years I've been out here, I've never seen them be frozen that late in the game. So these typhoons, obviously, the ones that recurve do have some impact in the overall pattern. All right, so now I can do my shameless self-promotion. So for those of you who are interested, I have a platform on Patreon. It's a subscription platform. It's $2 a month, and you're getting all my website posts, but you're getting them with no ads, which some people like. For some people, it doesn't make a difference, but for some it does. So no ads. You get exclusive posts that I don't put on the website. So you get to see stuff that no one else gets to see. So that's a plus. You can message me at any time, and I will respond to you in a timely fashion. And I also have been doing one video a day in the morning that is exclusive only to Patreon members, and we watch it here on YouTube, but nobody else can see it except those of you who are on the Patreon platform. So if you're interested, I am going to put the link up on the chat board. There are a bunch of different tiers of membership, but you get just about everything at $2 a month. If you're feeling a little more generous, the door is open. I won't say no. And if you need, super duper hand holding because weather's important to what you do for a living, then you can maybe look at some of the higher tiers. But it's $2 a month, and again, if you're interested, The link is there, and the link is also on the descriptor to this live stream. So let me come one more time to the chat board. We are now 55 minutes into this live stream tonight. And again, I'm always happy to see a nice crowd. We've got a nice crowd tonight. It's always a lot of fun. Hang on, I hit a wrong thing with my mouse. I have to. It's hard for me, folks, because oh, Stan, thank you for hitting super chat. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for doing that. It's very, very kind of you. It's hard. I'm talking to you. I'm looking at maps. I'm moving screens around. I'm pulling up pages, and my 60-year-old brain is trying to process all this, and I get confused, and I lose my train of thought. I lose the ability temporarily to complete sentences. So please bear with me. It gets a little hairy sometimes. Okay, have you seen there was an F3 tornado in Ottawa? No, I didn't, Ben. Did that happen? When did this happen? I did not. I'll Google it. Okay, so F3 tornado in Ottawa. Wow. Apparently, yes. More powerful tornado rips through suburb of Ottawa. Amazing. There's video there's video up and stories up on Google, folks. If you want to check that out, I'll check it out when we're done. Thanks for pointing that out. Tornadoes in Canada are not everyday occurrences, obviously, but apparently this year there have been more. There have been more than what you usually expect, and even here up in the Northeast, we've had a number earlier in the season more than now, but we've had more above normal tornado activity this year, while most of Tornado Alley has had actually below average tornado activity. So something was going on in the overall atmosphere to create that that dichotomy. Thank you, OKG. You're always welcome. Thank you very much. That happened 2 days ago. Yeah, I just saw that some of these stories just went up there, so I will give it a check. Okay, Ryan Ford, if the EPO is strongly negative, could that be signaling a threat of a tropical system along the East Coast longer term? I don't know. I don't know what the implications are, and I'll tell you why. Because I honestly, during the summer months, I don't really look at the indices too often. So I don't have a lot of hands-on experience as to what it may or may not mean. I'm going to have to defer that question to someone who follows that stuff a bit closely. I haven't seen anyone mention it, by the way, on from some of the weather folks that I follow on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter a lot, but I just happened to go on today, and I noticed a few tweets. But I'll ask a couple of friends of mine who might know more than about this sort of thing, and maybe they can get me an answer for you. Okay. So, all right. So we're coming up on 9 o'clock. It's been a great, fun hour. Thank you very much for being here. And I appreciate, again, all of you who have supported my channel, either via Super Chat or if you join the Patreon platform, which I put the link up, and there's a link on the descriptor to the live stream in the video. Or if you just simply, if you shop on Amazon every once in a while, if you use my link, Amazon throws me back a little bit of coin, and it's not out of your pocket, so it's out of Amazon's pocket. And all three are very good ways to support my channel. By the way, I am, I mentioned it a few times. I am going to be coming out with an app, which will make it easy to pull up my website posts as well. So that hopefully will happen in the next couple of weeks. We have it just about finished. We just have to basically just tweak it a little bit and get the okay from Google and Apple to put it in the in Google Play and in the Apple Store. Google Play, usually approvals come quick. Apple's a whole nother matter. They can be they can be a little bit difficult at times, but we hope to get the approvals quick. And as soon as I know, I will be putting up links about it, and we'll certainly put up links here regarding that. Chantel M. What if Kirk doesn't get sheared apart because it doesn't believe in no-win scenarios? Well, look, there's always the chance that it could, it could overcome that shear. Perhaps the shear area weakens. A lot of that's going to be really dependent on what Leslie does, because it's that deep upper trough from the cold low that's in the central Atlantic that extends pretty far to the south. So if that pulls out a bit faster, that might improve the upper air conditions, or at least make them less hostile. So then you have to wait till it gets into the Eastern Caribbean, where it's going to wind up find itself in hostile conditions again. The Europeans seem to hold on to it a bit longer today than in prior runs. So let's watch and see what it does over the next couple, and see if there are any changes as far as what the upper air conditions are down in the tropical regions south of 20 degrees north. Just because, by the way, perfect example of the fact that, we just had a depression form there east of the Windward Islands that didn't survive and got ripped apart. So it's not unusual for systems to form in the tropical Atlantic and not develop. That does happen. JM Super Chat is, if there's a $sign on the bottom of the chat board, so if you hit that, you can, if you'd like, you can hit it, and it, it's a way of supporting it's a way of supporting my channel. So help yourself if you'd like, and then I have the other ways too. Otherwise, I'll always have free YouTube live streams no matter what. It's just that I have to eat. Okay. Next year will be a Gulf year for hurricanes. Well, we'll see. 99 Wolves. A lot of things can happen every year. The hurricane seasons are always a bit different from the one before. There's always a bit of a twist to them, where you think one thing is going to happen and you wind up getting fooled, and it's quite another. And by the way, this season is not over yet. We still don't know, what's going to happen between now and, the middle part of October. After the middle part of October, usually activity dies off very rapidly. You get the odd storms out in the Atlantic, and every once in a while you get the odd storms in the Gulf of Mexico. A lot of that, by the way, depends on whether the model is right. With, if it winds up being deep troughs in the east, where you start pushing cold fronts all the way down into the Gulf of Mexico, that usually drives a stake in the heart of hurricane or tropical storm development in the Gulf. Not always, but a lot of the times it does. So that's another thing we're going to have to put on the list of things to watch as we move into the end of this month and the beginning of next month. Scott Burler, I know of Gordon Barnes, but Alan Casper's my hero and very good friend. He and I have been friends for 40 years, and he's probably the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing today, because I watched him when I was younger. Okay, last question tonight to Jay Gotcht. I hope I didn't botch it up. Can you talk about the ocean water temperatures this year? All right, really fast. Okay, so hang on. We can actually take a look at them. So I'm going to just bring them up. So everybody just hang on a second. We'll look at the ocean water temperatures at the moment. You can access this, by the way, if you go to the Hurricane Center's website and click where it says data and tools, but click just above it so that you don't get the whole menu, you don't get the drop down menu, but it actually goes to a second page, and it goes to their tools page, and there's a link here for sea surface temperatures, and you can pull those maps up. But with respect to the actual current water temperatures, okay, so here we go. I'll bring them up to the front of the screen. They are still, this time of year, these ocean water temperatures are still, obviously very warm. They haven't started really cooling off yet, except in the northernmost regions. And even there, that's a bit of a stretch. But, you have a large part of the tropical Atlantic. Kirk is now getting ready to move into, Kirk is actually at 10 degrees north. So it's it's not in that 28 degrees Celsius water. So it actually needs to get up to about 12 or 13 degrees north in order for it to really get into that warmer water that's up there. The water where Kirk is actually is a little bit cooler than where it is just to the north. And by the way, if you look around at 50 west and about 10 degrees north, you have 30 degree water there. So Kirk is actually moving into 27, 28 degree water I was looking down closer to 5 north, but it's at 30 west. So, it's in that 27-degree water there, and it's starting to move in even warmer water, especially when it gets to about 10 and 50. The water temperatures there are up about 86. There's that small, darker brown area. And you've got the 28 degrees Celsius line that goes all the way up into the Carolinas. By the way, the waters just east of here have now cooled to the upper 60s, which is what you would expect to happen when you get to this time in September, particularly when you start getting days with a northeast wind from a high to your north. And when we look at the anomalies, which is important to look at also, you have ocean water temperatures about normal for where Kirk is, and also above normal and much above normal north of 30 degrees north. In fact, there's a big patch of what looks like 3 and 4 degrees Celsius above normal just east of Cape Cod. There's some very, very warm water there, relatively speaking. I mean, we're still talking about waters in the upper 60s to low 70s, which wouldn't be too supportive for a tropical storm if it were to go up that way. But nonetheless, the water temperatures are still running above normal throughout much of the east. And that also, let me tell you that that's right now. All it takes is a couple of days of a strong east or northeast wind from a high in the Maritimes, and you can upwell that water in a big hurry and see that entire anomaly wiped out in a matter of a couple of days. So just because it's 3 or 4 degrees above average now doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be 3 or 4 degrees above average a month from now, or come the winter time, because that can change, as I said, in a real big hurry. All right. Thanks very much for being here tonight. I hope you enjoyed your weekend. Tomorrow's schedule: Patreon members will get a live stream tomorrow morning at roughly 9 o'clock Eastern time. So do look out for that. And we will have our regular YouTube live stream tomorrow night. Let's shoot for 7 o'clock Eastern time. Okay, but check the schedule on my YouTube channel. I will schedule a time as soon as I have a handle on it, of how my day is going to be. So I'll either do it at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. Right now, I am leaning toward the idea of doing it at 7 o'clock Eastern time. And of course, you can catch all the latest website posts either on my website at meteorologistjoechaffe.com, or if you subscribe to Patreon, you'll get my website posts and some other added posts that I throw on from time to time, throwing up. Sometimes I just see some stuff that requires a quick short post, and I put it up with an image or perhaps a map or whatever it is. But you can check it out on the Patreon platform, and of course you can always message me there, and I will respond to you in a timely manner. But don't forget, I do sleep sometimes, so if you message me at midnight, odds are you're not going to get a response from me until 8 or 9 o'clock the next morning. All right, have a great night, everybody. Thanks for being here. We'll see you tomorrow.